The Yankees are still atop Matt Snyder's power rankings in Major League Baseball, but just barely. Orioles are closing in. Phillies, Dodgers, and Guardians still in the top 5, but LA is dealing with some injuries to key players on their roster. Time to check in with the fellas. It's Monday. Matt Snyder and Jim Bowden. I'm Tommy Tran. Jim Bowden, of course, our MLB insider with injury updates, team news, and Matt, of course, puts our power rankings together. Dodgers are on deck, fellas. Let's first talk about the New York Yankees. Anthony Rizzo injured his wrist after a collision against the Red Sox over the weekend. But Matt, take me through just keeping New York there and the other challengers that are in tow.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times that a team is in the #1 spot and they lose a series, they end up getting dropped down. But the Yankees had put a little bit of cushion between them and everybody else, especially with beating up on the Royals earlier in the week. And then, the #2 team had been the Phillies, but they lost a series to the Orioles. The Yankees have a decent enough margin over the Orioles that I thought I still needed to leave the Yankees in first. But, they've got that series coming up head-to-head. So the Orioles could really take control of this thing. Yeah, the Anthony Rizzo injury is interesting to me. He's hitting .223 with the 79 OPS plus, and it's first base where you expect to get offense from. So the Yankees were probably going to turn to the trade market anyway, but with this injury, maybe that makes the conversation a little bit easier there. They don't have great in-house options. DJ LeMahieu has been terrible at the plate. I don't think you can move one of the outfielders to first in the middle of the season, so they're just kind of with a void right there.
So I talked to Aaron Boone, the manager of the New York Yankees, this hour. He said, first of all, they're waiting to get more imaging from Anthony Rizzo. They don't know the extent of the injury at this hour, but that's something we'll monitor here all day long here on CBS. Keep in mind, Rizzo just 5 for 48 in the month of June with just 1 home run. So they're not getting much production, as Matt just pointed out. Now, I asked him what they would do. Now, we saw when Rizzo left the game, they moved DJ LeMahieu to first base. They put Oswaldo Cabrera at third base. That's obviously a plan, but keep in mind they have 2 first basemen in AAA. One of them would probably get promoted if Rizzo goes on the IL. TJ Rumfield is hitting .303 down there. He's got 5 home runs. And then, of course, you have Ben Rice, who just got promoted AA to AAA and is off to a very good start at AAA, 14 for 42, and has already hit 3 home runs. So both of those guys would be options. Now, for those people wondering if Jason Dominguez could get the call and maybe play first, or he goes to left, Verdugo goes to first, forget about that. He went on the minor league IL yesterday with a left oblique injury, so he's going to be out quite some time. On the trade front, there is one possibility, and that is Josh Bell of Miami. They are going to try to move him. So if Rizzo's out long-term, and if they don't think Rumfield or Rice are ready, going to the trade market, Josh Bell would probably be the best trade option at this point.
Great stuff, Jim. And usually, of course, we have Matt talk about the power rankings and Jim follow. Although now let's get to the Dodgers, where I do want to have Jim go first, because we're talking about Betts, which is their leading MVP candidate, and Yoshinobu Yamamoto, arguably what #2 starter, fellows, we're talking about on the rotation here for LA. So Jim, just give me the laydown on Betts and that hand and wrist, and what is it, a rotator cuff for Yamamoto?
Yeah, so I just talked to Brandon Gomes, the general manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers, this hour to get an update on both. So Mookie Betts has a fracture of the left hand. He does not need surgery, but he's going to be out quite some time. So we're talking at least 4 to 6 weeks here. So I asked him what they were going to do at shortstop, and he told me Miguel Rojas will get most of the starts at shortstop. KK Hernandez will get occasional starts, and they're going to bring up Miguel Vargas from the minor leagues to take Betts' spot on the roster. I asked him because I had heard the rumor if they had interest in trading for Paul DeJong, the shortstop of the White Sox. He told me they had no plans to trade for him, at least as of today. Now, in terms of Yamamoto, it is the rotator cuff, okay? Now, he didn't say if there was a tear. They're calling it a strain. But the one thing's for sure, they are not going to take chances with a $325 million investment. So expect him to be out quite some time. I don't think you'll see him again till at least August on the mound. Now, in terms of replacing him, Bobby Miller will come off the injured list on Wednesday. He's been out for 2 months with shoulder inflammation, so he's going to be activated, start Wednesday. He will take Yamamoto's spot in the rotation. But there is no question, when you get injuries of this magnitude, front offices will pivot. They will look to the trade market here because this is a big injury. But also keep in mind, Clayton Kershaw is working his way back although his velocity has been nothing more than 86, 87, occasionally hitting 88, 89, so there's no guarantee that he'll be back looking like him.
You know, it's interesting to me that the last decade plus, the Dodgers have been so good in the regular season, but for the most part, things haven't exactly gone their way in the playoffs. Maybe this year they'll just have to deal with a lot of kind of speed bumps in the regular season, and then everything will be right come postseason, because it looks like both of these injuries should be resolved by the time we get to late in the season, and they're going to win the NL West anyway. So the bone should heal on Mookie Betts in 6 to 8 weeks or so that he'll be fine by September, and then come the playoffs. Maybe Yamamoto's good to go by the playoffs. Bobby Miller's coming back this week. Clayton Kershaw will be back by then. If they just get everybody right by October, then they can make a deep run, and we'll just put all this injury talk on the back burner. And like I said, it'll be an interesting contrast to some of these years recently since the 2020 World Series, where they've completely fallen apart in the postseason. So it's, for now, obviously it's a bumpy road here with Mookie Betts going down. You cannot replace Mookie Betts. Yamamoto going down. They've had rotation injuries all year, but I think that they need to kind of keep their eyes on the prize here and just make sure that they have everybody right by the time they get to the playoffs.
Okay, let's get back to the AL East and back to Snyder going first. So Matt, the Red Sox just out of the top 10, had those big series wins we talked about, Phillies and Yankees. However, in your power rankings, you said there's just nowhere to move them upward even further.
No, there was just a big gap between 10 and 11 last week. And I remember I kind of threw the Red Sox there by default because I didn't have anybody else who belonged there. Now they had a huge week, but they're still not worthy of jumping over anybody in the top 10. Most of the teams in there, like the Twins, are 10th. The Twins had a really good week as well. The Red Sox are interesting to me because if you look at their personnel, you wouldn't think that they would be this good. And it reminded me of in spring training when I interviewed Liam Hendricks, who is still coming back from Tommy John surgery. He said one of the reasons he liked signing with the Red Sox was they always tended to punch above their weight. That seems to be what they're doing with this roster. I mean, they're getting good stuff from guys like Connor Wong, Jarren Duran. Tanner Houck looks like a Cy Young candidate right now. It's you can't say enough for the job that Alex Cora has done with this Red Sox team. They are, as Liam said, punching above their weight.
Yeah, and Major League Baseball, I don't think has ever had any better managers on their free agent years at the same time, right? You got Alex Cora of Boston, not signed past this year. You've got Aaron Boone of the Yankees, not signed past this year. Going to be fascinating to see how that kind of plays out. But like Matt said, this team overachieves because Alex Cora, who's won a world championship as a manager, is certainly always going to overachieve with the teams he had. But I think what's really stood out to me with the Red Sox over the last couple of weeks are their young, athletic outfielders. And Jarren Duran hitting .353 over the last 15 days with 2 homers, 7 RBIs. He's stolen 6 bases in 6 attempts, and he's such a great base runner, getting the extra base, scoring on plays you shouldn't score from. And then the young kids, Today and Raphael, he's hitting .362 over the same span. So those 2 guys have been the catalyst. They get on base, they push the envelope, they create fastballs for the guys around them. And Tanner Houck, Nick Pivetta, and Cutter Crawford all have been solid over the last couple of weeks. That's been big. Rafael Devers doing what he normally does, driving in the big runs. And the Red Sox over the last 15 days are 5th in baseball in runs scored and 6th in team ERA. So they're playing extremely well. And we look at the parity, and you just showed on that graphic, teams 11 to 20, all within 4 games of the loss column. I mean, anybody can end up getting into the playoffs in that group, and managers make a difference when teams are that close. And I think Alex Cora, like Matt mentioned, has been a difference maker for Boston.
It's been a theme. You know, we spent a good time last week talking about how weak, I guess, the National League was, and that teams were still in it, despite them being below 500. That gets us to the Mets, gentlemen, number 18 in Matt Snyder's power rankings. You have a hot week. All of a sudden, the decisions of whether you got to move players like Pete Alonso certainly become a thing here. Matt, what are we thinking about New York at the moment?
It's funny. We've been talking about how the Mets were going to be sellers for a long time, and Pete Alonso was going to be the biggest name in the market. They're only a game and a half out. You cannot justify to your fans selling when you're only a game and a half out of a playoff spot, especially in a mega market like New York. So it's It's a waiting game here. I assume that David Stearns is eager to kind of reshape the organization in a manner that he sees fit. And so that could start with trading Pete Alonso. But when you're only a game and a half out of a playoff spot, you can't do anything right there. So look, we still have a while before the trade deadline. It's still a waiting game. I assume that the Mets will probably fall a little bit back in the wild card race, and they will become sellers at some point. But I mean, it's probably too much of a leap to make that assumption, because nobody in the National League, aside from the top tier of teams, seems to want to grab one of those last two playoff spots. Every time it seems like somebody like the Padres or the Giants get hot, they hit another cold streak. The Padres just went into Queens and got swept by the Mets. So for now, it's hold instead of fold for the Mets.
Yeah, it's a hold for a lot of teams, right? I mean, we only have 5 teams right now that are not within 7.5 games of the playoffs. I mean, we only have 5 sellers. That's it. And if teams just play 500 over the next 43 days, they're still going to be in the middle of a wild card race. And that's going to affect the trade deadline dramatically. And I think there's going to be some GMs and presidents like David Stearns of the Mets that's going to wish they were further out so they could rationalize trading a Pete Alonso or Luis Severino or Starling Marte to try to rebuild for the future. Because if they stay in the race like this, as Matt pointed out, you can't sit there and trade when you're a game and a half out, but that's going to really hurt your chances of rebuilding for the future. So it's going to be a very complex issue as we go forward, but there's a lot of mediocrity right now in Major League Baseball, and that will affect the trade deadline.
And then there's a continuing thought in the AL West, guys, right? Like the Astros, the Rangers, they got to get it going at some point. Yet they haven't. You guys talk about some of the gaps we're seeing in the standings. Matt, actually Seattle, I think, has the biggest gap between 1v2 at 8.5, and Seattle currently in your top 10 at number 7.
Yeah, the Mariners, 8.5 game lead. Just over a month ago, it was only 1.5 games. The Astros, both of us thought about a month ago, hey, the Astros are going to be in first place before the All-Star break. They're 12-13 in their last 4 weeks. So while they're not as bad as they were at the start of the year, they're not exactly setting the world on fire. They're just mediocre right now. They're 10-3 in Ronel Blanco starts and pretty terrible when anybody else does. Who would have thought that was going to be the case heading into the season? He got thrown in the fire based upon injuries. And the Rangers just came off a weird week. They won a series over the Dodgers. Anytime something like that happens with the champs, you think, okay, now they're going. They go into Seattle and get swept, and they got their teeth kicked in. They're 11-21 since May 8th. And I know that pitching injuries are going to be what gets a lot of attention here, but let's not overlook the offense and how bad it's been. Last year, they were the second best offense in all of baseball in the regular season behind the Braves, who had a historically good offense. Right now, they're 9th in the American League in runs scored, 11th in slugging percentage. We thought they were going to have a much better offense because they were that good last year, and it's just not there this year.
And I know it sounds weird to say, but both the Astros and Rangers have a much better chance of making the playoffs than the Mets do. And the Mets are a game and a half out of the playoffs, and the Astros are 6.5 out, and the Rangers are 7 out. But keep in mind with Texas, right? You've got Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer, Tyler Mahle, Cody Bradford, all on the IL, all expected back. That's 4/5 of your rotation, and they're difference makers. You also have Josh Young and Evan Carter on the IL. So if you get those 6 guys back, the Rangers have plenty of time to make a significant run and go 20-7. Like they're good enough they could do that and completely change the standings. Houston's going to be more of a challenge, right? Because you got Christian Javier, Luis Garcia, Jose Urquidy, all with Tommy John surgery out for the year. And who knows if Lance McCullers is going to be able to come back from the shoulder and elbow that he's been trying to come back from. And you've got 42-year-old Justin Verlander with a bad neck. So the Astros, I think, even though they're ahead of the Rangers, I think they have more of a challenge now to get in just because of the injuries to the starting pitching. So it's going to be interesting. I know one thing. Houston's going to be active at the trade deadline. They want a starting pitcher. They want a first baseman and a reliever. The Rangers are just hoping guys come off the IL and then just fine-tune middle relief and the bench. But it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out.
Great stuff as always. Our thanks to Jim Bowden and Matt Snyder. Gentlemen, thank you. We take a look at the notable games tonight. I can tell you that is Paul Skeens Day. Pittsburgh, which fell 3 spots to number 22 on Snyder's rankings, host the Reds at PNC Park. Both Grays on the mound, Sonny and John, for their respective teams.